Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Your Dose, the podcast which shares stories of lived experiences to help people feel less alone and more connected. In this episode, I speak with trauma therapist Jessica Ella about her journey through healing from childhood sexual abuse. Jessica shares how trauma shaped her identity, relationships, and trust, and how she rebuilt her life through somatic healing, subconscious reprogramming, and memory processing. She discusses her upcoming children's book, Secret or Surprise, designed to break the cycle of silence and explores the role of psychedelics in trauma healing. Trigger warning, there are a lot of things that are discussed in this podcast that may be difficult for some people to listen to if they have experienced this before or maybe find these topics quite difficult. If that's the case, please do listen with caution or maybe don't listen at all. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi, Jess, to the Odos podcast. Whereabouts in Australia are you, though, for the listeners?
So I'm on the Mornington Peninsula, which is in Melbourne, in Victoria. So by the beach. Beautiful.
I'm so excited to have a chat with you. I've been connected with you on Instagram for a while, but have become a little bit more aware of you since my conversation with Ryan Gadsby. If anybody's listened to my podcast, I'm sure that they've listened to the Ryan Gadsby podcast. If you haven't, go and listen to it. And Ryan shares his experience with childhood abuse, trauma, and this is something that you have experienced. So maybe for the listeners, if you could give a bit of an introduction of who you are, a little bit about your personal journey and what it is that you're doing now.
I go by Jessica Ella, which is actually my middle name. I just kind of dropped my name because of what I'm about to say. So I am 35 years old. I live on the Mornington Peninsula, as I said, and I have two beautiful boys. And what's got me into the work that I do, so I work predominantly one-on-one. I work predominantly with women with sexual trauma, so childhood sexual abuse. I also work with complex trauma of all types. But what kind of got me into that was my own personal experiences with trauma. So I actually studied and was borderline obsessive when it came to trauma for about 10 years, studying different certifications, never to practice, like literally just for my own self-knowledge. Like I just had to understand what trauma was and how it worked and why we heal and why we don't heal. And obviously unconsciously I was trying to heal myself as well, but it was just the passion. So I spent a good 10 years researching and studying, doing lots of different certifications and trainings. And eventually my own trauma kind of surfaced and was ready to look at after 10 years. And so my practice now is working one-on-one with women using a combination of somatics, energy work, subconscious belief work, and memory processing. So I blend the four of those things together so that a lot of the time people with trauma are having to go to multiple different practitioners to do those things. So I created this way of working that kind of attacks trauma from all angles and actually completes that healing circle. And that was something that I'd studied throughout that 10 years and then started to practice over the last 5 years with now over 1,000 individual people. So it came from my personal background was it's pretty intense. And I don't know if you do trigger warnings on your podcast, but definitely trigger warning for what I'm about to say because it's quite intense regarding sexual trauma. So I was molested from 3 years old until pretty much all of the way through my childhood by my biological father. And then I was raped by him later on around, it's hard with timelines, but around 19, 20 years old. Also, there was another family member of his that took my virginity when I was 7 years old, quite brutally. So I always say to people, the sexual abuse was obviously terrifying, but the hardest part was actually how confusing it was to have somebody who's supposed to be protecting you. So your greatest source of love and protection and safety is also your greatest source of fear and pain and hurt. And so the way that it affected me the most was that I grew up with this idea of what love with a male or a man looked like. And for me, it was love is confusing. Love is scary. Love is not safe. It's dangerous. It's toxic. It's it's up and down. And then obviously my relationship started to reflect that, because I chose people who mirrored that kind of up and down love, confusing love. I love you, I hate you. And I guess my dad was he's unwell, obviously, as anybody who does that to a child is, but he was very psychological, like with his abuse as well. Very, very manipulative, very confusing, like really just planting seeds in your mind, trying to confuse you about what's happening. Like I just grew up not knowing what was what. And he was also a very terrifying man. So he's quite dangerous. It was often, I'll kill you. This is exactly where I'll bury you in the backyard if you tell anybody. And I knew that he was a dangerous man in the criminal world. And so it was just like, there was no, like, you're just not going to tell anybody or you're going to die. It was just like, and because that was fed to me from such a young age, it was just, there was no other option. It was just like, you tell someone, you're dead. That's it, full stop. So that's the bit of a back history, some of it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, can't even, there's so much to unpack there. And also, I just can't believe how much to you at such a young age. Do you remember the age where you became aware that this was wrong? Because obviously this is behavior that's happened since you were 3 years old. So this is like the norm for you. And that's such a fundamental time between the ages of like 3 to 5 as well, in terms of how we develop and what our belief systems are. So yeah, do you remember what age you would have been?
I think that, like, you don't know it's wrong in your brain, obviously, because you're being groomed, you're being told, I love you, this is normal, but don't tell anybody. But it's just how you're raised, as you said. But you definitely feel it in your body. The feeling of shame it's like it's wired into us. Like there was those feelings of sickness and shame and disgust. And that's energetically, I'm picking that up from him or whatever, or whether it's actually just, biological. That fear and that shame and those disgusting feelings were definitely there all along. But having that actual moment of like, oh, wait a minute, this is wrong, I was 12 years old and he went through a lot of different girlfriends. So a little bit of back context, my mum left him when I was 7, domestic violence, like, to the outside world, he made it look like he had then stepped up as dad of the year. And so she kind of thought that it was a good thing that she left because he, became a better father. But obviously that's not what was happening behind the scenes. She left at 7. He had a number of different girlfriends. And when I was 12, I remember, because sometimes it was placed to me as like, this is special. It's just for us. Don't let anyone know. It was like this beautiful secret we were supposed to hold. And he was, it was a very loving way that he would say. And then other times it would be, I'll kill you if you ever tell anybody. So it's like, wait, is it like, it was very confusing, but I just kind of didn't really comprehend that as a child. And so when I was 12 years old, I told this girlfriend of his that I just felt a bond with her. And I remember I was washing the dishes and I said to her, something like, oh, I have a secret to tell you, but you can't tell anybody. And I was very innocent, and 12's quite old to, like, obviously I still had that childlike energy about me, like a very young childlike energy. And I said to her, like, I've got a secret to tell you. And I said, Dad and me do things. And he touches I called it my fanny. He touches my fanny. He does this. And I told her things and I was like, but you can't tell anybody. I was telling her in a way that was like, I love when I'm going to kind of let you in on this secret. And I remember she dropped the dish and she was like, and she panicked and she started crying and she was like, what do you mean? And she was like, I'm really distraught, obviously. And then he came in and said, what's going on? And she repeated what I said. And I'll remember it forever. The way that he looked at me and the way that he spoke to me, like spit was flying out of his mouth. He was just like, you're a fucking liar. Why would you make up these stories? Why would you say that? There's something fucking wrong with you. Like, I can't believe you would make that up. Tell her right now that you're lying. Why would you say that? Just kept saying there's something wrong with me. And the most messed up part about this is that he said that she should probably go home because he needed to talk to me because this was really serious. And then that night he did it again. So I was just like, that was the moment where I was like, whoa, this is wrong. because he's saying it's serious and he could go to jail, and he's saying all these things, but then he's done it again tonight. And then he was very loving that night. So it was like, wait, what? Like, that's like, I literally didn't know which way I was up growing up, but that was the moment when I think I realized, oh, okay, this is wrong. And then kind of went into my teens knowing that it wasn't right, and started to build up anger, but had nowhere to put that anger because I couldn't do anything about it. So, yeah.
So did his girlfriend at the time, obviously she would clearly knew that you were telling the truth. Like,
so
and then
it's actually like a wild story, but I think she's actually had her own abuse, but she's very head in the clouds, very not going to look at it, very not going to deal with it. She was madly, passionately in love with my dad. About a week later, he broke up with her, but he told her it was because she was slutty and she was this and she was that, and basically shamed her. And apparently I spoke to her many years later, went to therapy for years after this, because she was like, I don't know why he broke up with me. And she never pieced together the fact that he was cutting her out because of what she knew. And she never took it any further. She actually believed him when he said that I was lying, and she never did anything. So I actually reached out to her about 5 years ago and was like, hey, do you remember a conversation in the kitchen? And kind of just wanted to see what she remembered. And she actually did remember that conversation and apologized for not doing anything with it. But not long after that, my father got wind of the fact that I had reached out to her, and actually reached out to her again, and has started since dating her again. So wild, I know. Like, obviously there's a lot going on there.
she's dating him knowing all of this information still.
Knowing there's other people that have come forward, like, she's just, yeah, like, obviously there's something not right there with her, which is sad, but yeah. So that was very much, yeah.
And so you obviously still at that point, when you're explaining it, there was still an element of like naivety to you, almost like you were a bit like, you still maybe weren't, you knew it was wrong, but you were still very young and naive, and you were just like a secret. Then obviously you had that reaction, and then you started to maybe perceive it a little bit differently. During that time, did you then open up to anyone else about what was happening?
I believe after that there is like a bit of a gap where I don't have any memories of him doing it. And it was when I was about 14, so 2 years later, I didn't have a lot of friends all throughout primary school or high school. I was really bullied. I was a very strange kid. I like had a lot of like little twitches and tics, and, you know, trauma, like my nervous system was just completely shot. I was just traumatized. And I used to get teased. I've got like sort of forward ears. I used to get teased about my ears. I just was bullied every day. So I didn't have a lot of friends, didn't have anyone that I felt like I could confide in until I was 14. And I made friends with this boy called Nathan, and he was just like the most beautiful boy. He was just kind and caring, and I spent a lot of time with him, purely friendship based. And one night I'd got up the courage to tell him what had happened. He was really upset, really angry. I remember there was a party. He used to throw parties at his house. There was a party a couple of weeks later, and he was like, he'd had drinks, and he was like getting a group of guys together, and like, we're going to go and bash the shit out of her dad, because he lived around. And he was trying to like get people together to go and beat him up. And I was like, no, please don't do that. Like, it's dangerous. Please don't. But I told him, and then probably, I want to say, again, timelines are really hard, but I want to say about 6 months later, he was actually hit by a car coming out of a party. Someone swerved off the road and hit him, and he died instantly. Yeah, so after he died, I didn't know how to deal with the grief. I felt like when I told him the secret, it was really scary because he wanted to do something about it. And then I'd realized it's not actually safe to tell anybody because they have these big reactions, and then it's like I have to do something. So after it was obviously awful, but I also felt this, and this sounds awful, but like a sense of relief, because I was like, okay, now no one knows again. I don't have to do anything about it. And then I kind of just kept it from that point forward, I actually found a way to forget, which sounds wild. And I don't know if you've interviewed many people with repressed memory, but I basically had developed multiple personality disorder, or DID, and I basically found a way to split the information. Like I literally I'd have flashbacks. Yeah.
Like,
so I'd have flashbacks.
Yeah.
And I found ways, narratives in my head blinking really hard, like just weird certain ticks and ways that I could see a memory, blink, push it down, forget about it. And I basically had a split of like a good dad and bad dad. And anytime I'd have a bad memory, my brain, once I did this little process of like, you're disgusting, don't think about that, blink, 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 I would be able to think about a good memory of my dad, something nice that he'd done. And I'd replay these good memories.
That's because you're literally like conditioning yourself in like a therapy sense though, because that's almost how certain therapies can work, isn't it? Like you're basically trying to take a good memory to replace a bad memory. Like I've done therapy like that before. So you are literally conditioning your brain to think that, that your dad's a good person.
Because the memory is a traumatic memory and it's unprocessed, where it gets pushed to in your brain, and because it was for survival, so I wasn't consciously doing it. That's just what your brain does. So it wasn't like I made a decision. Yeah. It was like, I'm going to die. Like he's actually going to kill me, because when he found out that because he knew that I had told Nathan. So I remember that day vividly. I came home and he's like, you've told somebody, go into your room. I remember him closing my door and just smashing shit, breaking things, throwing me on the bed, screaming at me. Like I was terrified, and I was like, okay, he's definitely going to kill me if I say anything. And I think that's when the split came in of like, if you actually want to survive, you've got to figure out a way to get through this, because you can't escape him ever. So my brain developed, and that's where the split personality came into play. And it was so split to that the version of me that loved and adored him and saw him as good dad, that version of me spoke differently. I thought differently. I'd make different business decisions. I'd make different life decisions. I had a different diet. I had different clothes.
How, like, what the split between these two personalities? Was it days, or was it literally like you could be in one personality for like an hour?
It was completely unconscious and uncontrolled, but I basically, sometimes it could be a day, a few days, or sometimes it could be weeks or months. So, and it would be triggered by something. So something would trigger me and I would move out of the like doting, more kind of like I was very dissociated in one, and in the other one I was hyper focused. I was like very protective, like fuck you, I'm leaving, I'm not doing this person can't say that. Like I was like superwoman on steroids. But I would switch when something unconsciously would trigger me. So something would trigger me into that like protective survival mode. And like I was in fight or flight in both of them, which is, some people don't realize, like they think with your nervous system, you're either in fight or flight, or you're in dissociation, or you're in the flow. Like you've got the window, you've got the 3 stages. They think that you're in one or the other, but I literally lived for 30 years with my foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. And my engine blew many times as an analogy, but I was always in fight or flight and dissociation at the same time. But sometimes one would take over, what personality mindset would take over. And it would literally be to the point where I would go into the other, I call them sides, because it's almost like I was split in half. I'd go into this other side and I'd be like, what the fuck have I been doing for the last six months or 6 weeks or however long it is? Like, why have I been acting like that? What's wrong with me? And then I'd make all these life changes, and then I'd flick over into the other side and be like, what's been wrong with me lately? And I'd just be falling back and forward, fighting myself.
If people around you, like, were they aware of you doing
knew
this?
That I was up and down. When I got diagnosed properly and it was identified and picked up and really shown to me how clear it was, I took the piece of paper home and to my mum, and my mum was like, I know those 2 Jesses. I know them so well. She was like, I'm sorry I didn't notice. Obviously, she's not qualified to diagnose that. She just thought I just had 2, like, 2 settings.
Moody or something, or like not, maybe notice that maybe like unsure of your sense of self,
like the way
maybe? I don't know.
Like the way that it's described to me is that like we have a self, like this is IFS, we have a self and then we have all of these parts, right? Like that make up self. But the way with DID is almost like you have two selves with isolated parts, and those parts are like, they contradict each other. They're like fire and ice, like they're opposites. And so all the parts that make up this self are very strong, and all the parts that make up this self are very strong, and they're polarizing. So it's not like you've got different expressions of self as a person. Like sometimes you can be moody and sometimes you can be fun and playful and whatever. It's like this version is only this and this version is only this. So it kind of like splits it into two.
Yes, too. So your mum, we've not really spoken much about that because you've obviously, were you living with your mum and dad were split? Is that right? And so were you spend time between dad
split
and
custody?
And was your mum?
No,
Do you think she knew about this?
I do believe that if my mum had have known that there was anything going on sexually or physically, because there was physical sometimes as well, I think that if she had have known what was going on, she would have done something. From her perspective, I literally would never want to leave my dad. I had an intense trauma bond with my dad, like Stockholm syndrome. Like I actually felt safer sometimes when I was with him than when I wasn't with him. It was but then I'd feel so scared when I was. It was very confusing. So, but from her perspective, I just loved and adored him. And she didn't really know about grooming. She didn't really know about that. She knew that I wasn't well. So I had a lot of health issues, which are all trauma symptoms now, like headaches, sore tummies, eye issues, which was dissociation. My eyes were blurry. I didn't need glasses. Taking me to specialists. She sent me to a psychologist. She tried to send me to healers. Like she knew that I wasn't okay because I was very angry, very emotionally reactive, depressed at times. Like I was a roller coaster of emotions. So as you would be. So she knew that there was something not right, and she was trying to help, but she would not have ever thought that it was that. And when I told her, whole healing journey for her.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did she I suppose you don't know too much about your dad and her relationship, but do you think he was ever abusive to her? Did she seem shocked when she found out?
She was
that's
shocked.
What had been happening?
She's like, I knew that he was an awful, terrible person, and I knew that he's just not right. And she's like, I knew that about him, but I really thought that was kind of him as a person, not him as a dad. Like I really felt like he was a good dad, but he was just a shit person. She had there was domestic violence. She was terrified of him. Like it was so brave that she actually left him. Like that would have been really scary to leave someone like him. So there's some stories of things that he's done to her that was like pretty horrific. He was cheating all the time. He was out drinking. He was never home. He was constantly critical of her. So by the time she left him, she was kind of a shell of a human. Like it's taken her a long time to build up any level of self-worth, and she was just dissociated. She was terrified of him, of what he was going to do. He was constantly attacking her mothering, making the divorce really difficult. So I think she was just in survival mode too. So there was a level of she got together with my stepdad quite quickly. There was 5 of us kids in the house. It was really just go away and play, and I'm just going to survive. So she definitely, she'd had her own trauma with him, her own issues with him. When I told her, she was straight away I can't, this is so shocking, but I believe you, which was the response from everyone. They were like, yeah, that's didn't expect it, but I also can imagine it and believe you. And so she has had to do a lot of healing work because she, the guilt and the shame that she feels for not knowing, for not protecting me, for not piecing it together. So that's why her and my sister and I have written a children's book, and it's been actually really healing because she gets to look at it from the lens of what do I wish that I had have told my kids so that they would have felt safe to tell me. And then I've looked at it from what would I have needed to hear to believe that I could tell. And my sister's an artist, so she's illustrated it. And we've kind of got all those different perspectives of like, okay, what did I want to hear? What did she want to say? And we've put it together.
I love that. Especially that it's a children's book. To have such an early and fundamental stage is so important.
So the
What's
book
the book
is called
called?
Eyes, and it's the initials is SOS, which we didn't even realize until after we had named it. So, yeah, it's so cool.
That?
And it's basically, it's aimed at children like 4 to 10 years. So we noticed that there was no books like being quite direct about sexual abuse at a young age. And it's because people were like, oh, you know, that's not a conversation you have at that age. We don't want to even tell kids what that is. But then like by not doing that, you're risking the fact that they'll hold it forever. And yeah, so it's also coming from a perspective. So it's unpacking secret or surprise, but it's also, so it's like, this is a happy secret. This is an unhappy secret. These things should never be kept a secret. And it also goes into like, sometimes the person that's asking you to keep the secret is someone in your family and someone that you love, which can be really confusing, but you should always still tell somebody, and it goes through who they should tell, being brave, stepping into being brave. So it's like really, we've read it a million times and gone over every page and been like, what else do they need to know? What objections would they have? So that it really covers everything, but in a way that is age appropriate. So the right imagery that's not going to scare them, that's not going to put any thoughts in their head, you know, just kind of had to really really make sure it's perfectly well-rounded in that way. So the idea is that we can get to those kids with the parents' help, obviously, by buying the book and by like spreading that awareness. We can get to those kids at the age where it can stop and where people can actually be prosecuted, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but like historical cases take years and years, and a lot of the time, like it's a little bit changing, but a lot of the time, especially in Australia, you don't win those cases, and they can appeal it, and it goes on for, it can take up to 8 years. So stopping it when it's happening to the child is like gonna be a game changer in so many respects.
Yeah, that kind of leads on quite nicely to the question that I was wanting to ask you about what has happened with your dad. Obviously, you've mentioned that your dad is now dating someone else, so he's clearly living normally. He must be aware of sharing your story online.
So
what has happened with that?
When I first shared it publicly, it was terrifying. I'm not going to lie, I had a complete nervous breakdown, like probably the worst part of my life after I publicly shared it for the first time. And it went quite it spread like wildfire and had a lot of traction overnight. This was probably 4.5 years ago. And I was convinced that he was going to come and kill me. Like every car that drove past my house and I was on a busy street, I was like, it's him. And I was so convinced he was coming to kill me. I started hearing him like coming through the front door when he wasn't really there. Like I started having hallucinations. It was awful time. But I just kept moving forward. I just kept telling it. I just kept going, and I just kept being like, this is something that I feel like I need to do. And it is definitely something because of where it's led me. But I decided, I went through a lot of stages. I went through all the stages of grief. To be honest, when I first cut him out, I grieved him like nothing I've ever grieved before. I was like, I want to go to him. I want to talk to him. I want to be around him. I miss him. I need him. And then went through like feeling sorry for him, feeling like I'd ruined his life. I wanted to tell him that I forgave him. I wanted to tell him like I was so like shaken by it. And then I came out the other side of that to like red hot rage and just like a year of just like wanting to tell him what I wanted to tell him, and going through those. And when I was in that stage, I was like, I'm taking him down. He's going down. So I got the other people that he's also assaulted together and wanted to start a case together and made some traction with that. But really the advice that I was given by a number of detectives was kind of like, it's going to be really hard for you to win this case, because I speak on podcasts and sometimes I'm like, I think I was 11 years old when that happened. Maybe I was 12, because I don't have clear ages, and it's more like I know which house I was living in and things like that. I don't know. They were just like, you'd have to stop speaking publicly about it while the case was on, and it could go for 8 years. You'd have to stop there was a number of things I wouldn't be able to do with the work that I'm doing. And the chances of me actually winning in Australia was pretty low, even with other people. I mean, it was still there, but there was also a lot of warnings for me around my safety, because it is been made common knowledge to us that he's very well connected in the police force and in all the worlds. So it was very like, you have to really think about this. At the time, I'd left my marriage, I was living on my own, and like my kids were there obviously half the time. But yeah, it was very like, okay, where do I want to use my energy? Do I need him to go to jail, or like, what do I actually need from this? What do I need to heal from this? And for me, it was like, well, my mission has always been like, I've always not been able to handle other people's suffering. And if I know how to fix it, I want to help them. And that's obviously why I got into my work. So I was like, all right, what can I do to change the game instead of spending 8 years going through court? And that's where like the book and speaking up and giving people tools on how to actually heal this, because it doesn't affect my life anymore. So that was the other thing. I was like, I'd have to really dredge it all back up, because I've processed every memory. I've changed my identity. Like I literally am not the same person anymore.
Yeah. And has your dad tried to contact you at all?
He did for the first few months, and then just gave up. I think once I started speaking online about the fact that other people had come forward, my cousin had come forward, my brother, like he was just done.
It's his battle, right? Do you still live with fear, knowing that he's out there somewhere?
It crosses my mind every now and then. There will be, a car that's similar to his, and I'll kind of look at the number plate if it's on my street or whatever to make sure it's not his car. But it's just like kind of checking, and then I'm like, oh yeah, cool, it's not him. I don't think about him often. And yeah, I definitely don't. There's probably been a couple of times where something has happened, or I've watched something triggering, and then that night I'll be like, oh, or did I hear something? And like, I'll definitely be in that like protective mode, but it's pretty rare that I will get that feeling. He only lives about 40 minutes away from me. Yeah, so it's not something that I really don't, it sounds crazy, but I really don't think that, I mean, unless he went fully unhinged, I really don't feel like he would actually hurt or murder his own. Yeah.
It's just, yeah. So you've come such a long way, and you're basically saying that you've got to a point where this doesn't affect you anymore. You spoke a little bit about your trauma therapist and some of the work that you're doing, but how did you heal from such a traumatic experience?
It definitely takes time when it's complex trauma, when it's ongoing, when you have multiple memories of abuse. And I think the thing that people don't understand is that, isolated events are one thing, and that takes time, not even that much time to go through and process each of those memories. So I correctly processed every single memory, which was involving retrieving it, recoding it, changing the way I saw it, expressing the emotions that were in the memory, looking at the beliefs that were created in the memory, shifting the subconscious beliefs. So it's like processing the memory, working with the inner child, changing the subconscious beliefs, and then like, purging the emotion that's stuck in the body in order to complete each memory. But then there was another huge layer that I think a lot of people miss, especially if they're just memory processing through EMDR or something like that, is that I had to change my identity. And when I say that, what I mean is I identified as somebody who struggled and suffered, and who bad things always happened to, and who life was really hard. And that was my beliefs about who I am and what life is like for me. I have low self-worth. Nobody listens to me. Nobody likes me. All of those beliefs were, I guess the thing with complex trauma is that it's not so much about what happened, but what you decided about who you are. And it's like, when you're being abused and confused and manipulated and controlled and constantly criticized from the time you're born, in those developmental years, the number of beliefs that I had that were negative about myself were in the thousands. And so it's taken all of that time, 15 years deep now, into removing all of those subconscious beliefs and replacing them with what I want to be true. So I literally went from someone that thought that everyone hated me, everyone was looking at me, no one liked me, no one wanted to be my friend, like everyone thought I was weird, all of these things, to now walking to a room and just believe, like truly believing that I'm magnetic and that people want to talk to me, people want to be my friend. And that's what's happened, because that's what I've believed and perceived and attracted. And it's gone from not being able to speak up, feeling powerless, to feeling powerful and not being afraid of nearly anything. So it's gone through that process of, when I say recreating my identity, I just mean taking out all of those things that I believe to be true because of what he did and replacing them with what me and my soul and, Jess wants to believe about who Jess is. So that's probably was like the biggest and longest part, was actually the reprogramming of like who I am and what's possible for me. And people do a little bit of it, but they don't do it all. So they'll do the belief work, but they don't do the emotions. They don't want to feel anything. Or they'll do the belief work, but they don't process the memories. So they still have triggers and flashbacks. So that's where I went through all those layers and learned that the hard way.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you're saying that, because obviously I've been through different trauma, but I could really resonate with a lot of what you were saying there. Like, a lot of my belief systems were around not feeling good enough and like guilt and shame. And then when a few years ago, I worked on, you might have heard of EFT, which is energy psychology. And yeah, it's a process of uncovering those beliefs and then emotionally letting those go. And yeah, I mean, I was always the same. Like, so I was actually speaking to a friend recently, and she's here visiting from the UK, and she's like, you're just so confident in front of everyone. Like, you're always making friends. And I was just explaining to her today, like, that was never me. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I would have spent the whole time thinking, it's so funny that you were saying that. I'd be in a situation, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, I'm not cool enough, I'm not pretty enough, they don't like me, am I saying this wrong? And it's like, I would spend the entire social situation not speaking, and then people would think that I wasn't very nice, or that I was really standoffish because I wasn't saying anything, but actually the whole time I was just in my own head. It's crazy. So in terms of, I asked a similar question to Ryan, but obviously you're healed now, but I don't know whether this is an ongoing journey. I always find like you're just kind of going on this healing journey kind of forever. Is there anything that you do to manage your trauma now? Do you have like coping mechanisms, for example?
I don't really have any coping mechanisms because I don't have any anything that comes up. To be honest, now that all of the trauma has been dealt with around my dad and the other relative, and like those kind of like bigger, intense childhood traumas, I'd already worked through bullying and all those other layers. More recent traumas have been like, hi, let's just, I remember saying to my partner the other day, I went into anaphylactic shock a few weeks ago. I didn't realize I had anaphylaxis, never had it to anything, took this medication for sinus pain that I'd never had before, and just took this painkiller that was just over the counter, and my throat closed over and I stopped breathing, and it was terrifying. And it brought up all these other things that it was like I was being shown. It was like, hold on, you've got some more things. And it brought up all of these things to do with my marriage, my past relationship, betrayal, things that had happened there that would really affect anybody. But I was just like, oh, that's nothing, because I've got to deal with all of this. So I started to have like memories coming back of different times in that relationship, of things with past friends in the last few years. I had Lyme disease and I got really, really ill with it. I had to go overseas for medical treatment. All of these other traumas started surfacing that I was like, oh, there's actually so much else that's happened beyond that bulk of it from childhood. So I started using when I said, like, I don't necessarily have coping mechanisms to cope with when that comes up. I have all of the tools. So when they came up, I was like, oh, okay. I guess the way that I look at it now is like, oh, there's like more to be seen. It's not kind of like, what am I going to do when I'm going backwards and I feel like shit again? It's just like, oh, that was traumatic. I'm going to work on that. So then I will just process the memories. I'll do some techniques to feel the emotions, and 2 days later it's gone. And then if there's another one, I just work on it as it comes. But I'm feeling like I'm getting to that point where the things that I'm thinking about and that are coming up are sort of more recent years. So it's like, all right, we're getting there. Yeah. I'm very if there's something to be done, we're doing it tomorrow. Like we're not just going to sit there and sit on it. We know what to do. Let's just do it. And I have a great partner who's like, you know what to do, like go and do it. I'm like, oh yeah, yep, cool. Let's not just stay in the shit.
You speak about psychedelics, mushrooms. I've seen you talk about on your Instagram. I've had a few people talk about this on my page before. And I always love the conversation because I think some people are against it and some people think that it's the most transformative experience ever. Didn't actually watch the reel because I wanted to ask you in the podcast, but you did say that you'd taken mushrooms and something had happened.
Yeah. See, I feel like with mushrooms, psychedelics, even like ayahuasca and things like that, I feel like you should be using it as needed. I think some people get stuck in like doing it too much and trying to drink everything up. I feel like it's one of those things that like you use it when you need it. And for me, psychedelics puts you into, so if you think about repressed memories, you have to be in an altered state of consciousness to repress a memory. And psychedelics, it puts you into the same altered state of consciousness, which is why there was that epidemic in the 60s where people were taking psychedelics and having trauma resurfacing, and they were like, oh, it's the psychedelics, they're losing their mind. It wasn't actually, it was repressed memories coming forward. Psychedelics are amazing for that, and that's what happened to me. So I went to this retreat we had a dose of magic mushrooms mixed in with a ceremonial dose of cacao, and we drank it, meditated, waited for it to kick in, and then we laid down and did breath work whilst we were on the psychedelics with the cacao, which is like potentially the most potent, like that's like the most intense. Yeah. Like on perspective, like looking back, I was such an all or nothing person. I'm definitely a bit more different now, but I was like, they were like, do you want like a micro dose? Do you want the maximum dose? And I was like, give me the maximum. So went in just balls deep. I can't even think of another saying, but I was just like, just give it to me. So I was breathing and I went in there with so much ego. I was like, I've done like 12 years of healing. I'm going to have like this beautiful riding on rainbows experience. And I started breathing and everything went dark. And I was like, oh no, please no. And it took me back into a memory, and it took me back into a moment that I had blocked out, and it was to do with my brother. So it was definitely a guilt kind of memory. And it was hearing my father like coming down the hallway and panicking and freezing, and then him not coming into my room, him going into my little brother's room, and knowing why he was going into my little brother's room, but not being able to move, being frozen, and just feeling like I wanted to save him, but feeling like I couldn't, feeling like it wasn't safe to move, things like that. So it was like this like guilt and fear and shame and so much sadness for my brother because he was so little at the time, and just like, yeah, it really like just brought up all of that. But I was stuck in the memory, and in the memory, he was like a dementor. Like he was like this evil, disfigured, dark shadow, and it was just really creepy and scary. And so I got stuck in it, and I actually felt like I couldn't open my eyes. And so I sat up, and I was basically having a panic attack, and the people were like trying to comfort me, but I was trying to open my eyes, but I was just stuck in this memory. So I just like kicked into this like, okay, like you've got to do what you know to do for work. So I like, came in as the adult and went into the room and saved my brother and, kicked my dad's ass and took everyone out of the house and like used the tools that I had whilst in that trip. And then after I came out of that, I went to sleep that night. And when I went to bed that night, my dreams were so whack because like it was at night that we did it. So we were still on the mushrooms as we went to sleep. And I had all these messages about my marriage, about things that were happening, like just had all these aha moments because, I was dissociated 99% of the time. I would unsee anything that I didn't want to believe. And so I started seeing things a bit more clearly and getting these messages in my dreams that night. And then, it wasn't long after that I kind of blew up my life. There's a couple who actually have broken up that used to run them. So it was in the, like in the Yarra Range, or like Yarra Ranges, like near Menzies Creek. It was just, it was at their house, and it was beautiful. They had this beautiful house with this amazing view, and yeah, it was so good, but they don't do it anymore.
That's incredible. Yeah, I've heard a lot of really like amazing healing journeys from mushrooms, often quite scary, but like you have that moment of panic, and then it's like it's all around control, isn't it? I remember I had a guy come on and talk about when he took mushrooms, and his whole life he'd been in control, and this was the first time that he wasn't in control of his thoughts anymore, and he had to let go, and he just let go of everything. And yeah, he also he had an eating disorder, and he was able to basically heal himself of that just through this mushroom experience. So yeah, it's pretty insane. In terms of your trauma work that you do as a trauma therapist, I guess without breaching confidentiality, what might be one of the most transformative experiences that you've had with a client?
I mean, I've had so many. There's so many that I can think of. I've had women who were addicts because of sexual abuse, like that, who were addicts that have like literally turned their life upside down, have stopped using, have found safe relationships, have gotten into the career like passion that they're passionate about. I had one woman who had been gang raped and lost her virginity to a gang rape when she was a teenager, and was betrayed by a friend like that set her up for that experience. So like a lot of trust issues, things like that, who's ended up like turning her because she couldn't have sex, things like that. So she's like turned her relationship around. She has zero flashbacks now. She used to have flashbacks of it daily. So all of my clients that do the trauma processing don't have flashbacks anymore. But I had people that have been kidnapped that like literally couldn't leave the house, living in fear, and now they're out like exploring, traveling. I've had like someone who had like intense death, like health and death anxiety, like would think about dying every second of every day. Yeah,
I've had
like a fear of choking, fear of tripping, fear of car crash, fear of absolutely everything, to who has got rid of that almost completely. There's just this little bit there, but it definitely like it pops up every so often. Whose was just so blown away by the fact that she'd been trying to fix that for 10 years, that we did those 5 sessions together. She's come and studied, and now she helps people with health anxiety. I've had so many beautiful stories of like someone that has lost a child, has done the course. Now they help people with grief and loss. And there's been so many that like have just touched me, and that I feel really grateful. It sounds crazy that, I can feel like after everything I've been through that it's a blessing, because it means that I understand every type of suffering. So I've been able to help people with anything. So yeah, I'm trying to think of other people. They're like the main ones that come to mind.
Yeah, which is incredible. Some of those stories, and I remember having this conversation with Ryan. What I love about my podcast is speaking to people like you who have had this really traumatic experience, but they've come out the other side and they're able to live a normal life. And I think it's really being able to show people that there is hope, and that no matter what you've been through, you can go on and get past that. And it's difficult, and it takes hard work. Like it's took you years of work to be where you are now, but it's actually very possible. Because it doesn't matter what you're going through. I have people with lots of different issues that listen to my podcast. But ultimately, no matter what it is, and no matter how hard it seems, it is absolutely possible to live a normal life, to go on and form normal relationships, which with something like what you've been through, obviously you have 2 boys. I looked at your Instagram, they're so cute. 2 little boys, and you have you engaged to your partner? I mean, I guess, while we're on that topic, how difficult was it to form relationships with a man?
It was definitely difficult. I had a lot of relationships that reflected the same pattern as with my father, of highly critical and abusive, just very up and down, very secretive, a lot of betrayal, manipulation, all those sorts of things. And so I guess the stacking effect of those relationships, those past relationships, really solidified my distrust in men and love. and just not being able to love a man and not be able to trust a man. I had some pretty negative beliefs. And I definitely have projected a lot of those onto my current partner, Gav, over the course of our relationship. But he's just such a beautiful soul and so level-headed and grounded that he can really notice it and point it out to me in like the most calm, loving way that I'm able to be like, oh yeah, okay, that is like a past thing. Probably the biggest one is trust. And I think I didn't have a foundation of trust. There's no foundation there of like learning how to trust or what trust is. It's just like, you don't trust men. You just don't, full stop. Like that was my experience from childhood. So then having that mirrored and having that proven to be true in all my past relationships, when I met Gav, there was no like, I'm just going to give you the benefit of the doubt and trust you until you break my trust, which is like kind of had, you know, untraumatized people work it. He was like, but I haven't done anything to break your trust. I'm like, you haven't done anything to build it. Like, it kind of, I had this like, I was very like going through the motions of like, oh, I just want to be single again. It's so much funner being single. It's so much better being single. But really that was just me kind of wanting to protect myself because it was easier and safer. Yeah.
I can really resonate with that one.
Definitely pushing him away a lot and him just kind of in a gentle way reminding me we spent 4 months together. What's that?
That's so lovely that he's stuck around and like understood you.
He's always just like, after everything you've been through, of course you feel like that. Of course you have those feelings. And then he's like, but you know, what can I do to like make you feel more safe? What can I do to like, is there something physically I can do? Is there something I can say to you? Like, he's always just like, what do you need from me? And yeah, he went traveling around Australia after like we dated for 4 months and he booked this trip. And so he was gone for 8 months. And that was probably the worst of it because the trust that was not there had to be built while he was traveling. And that was such a bad 8 months. I was just like, I'm just gonna break up with him. Like, I'm just gonna break up with him.
Not in a good place.
I love him, but I'm just gonna break up with him.
Yes. It'll be easier because it's gonna hurt me anyway.
I learned a little while ago, which would be helpful for people to know, I guess, is that I used to always try and use my brain to figure out if somebody was right. And in my past relationship or in my marriage, which I was with my ex-husband for 12 years, I would constantly question whether it was right, whether it wasn't right, whether it was me, whether it was him, like, you know, because I was so used to blaming myself for everything that I learned how to talk to my body and I learned how to actually notice signals from my body because I was like, the body doesn't lie. The brain's a complicated thing, but the body doesn't lie. And so I started to be able to tap into my body and be like, okay, what does my body say? What does my body want to do? And it was that, well, does my body feel safe? Do I feel safe around him? And I was constantly being like, I just want safe love. Like all I was craving for years was safe love. I talked about safe love with him and I talked about it in therapy. I was like, I just want this like safe love where I just feel safe. And I couldn't explain it because I'd never had it, but it was all I was craving. And my body was like, this isn't safe. I was clenched up. I was tense. Like my body didn't feel safe. And no matter what I did, I couldn't feel it. When I met Gav, I felt so calm and safe and relaxed that I actually convinced myself that he was just a friend. I was like, he's just going to be a friend because I just feel so relaxed and calm around him. Like that's not normal.
It's crazy, isn't it? Is there anything looking back that you think were like obvious symptoms other than just not feeling safe, but like obvious, like maybe physical symptoms that you are having that would be signs that you actually didn't feel safe in that relationship? Because I think a lot of people don't know how to listen to their body. And then you hear people like break up with someone and they're like, oh, wait, I had like really bad gut issues the entire time we were together. And then now we've broken up.
I think
those
like
gut issues
like
have just
anything
disappeared.
to do with nervous system. So like if you're getting like if you're tensing up your body, if you've got sore neck all the time, you've got headaches, like if your body is constantly in tension, that's a pretty clear sign. But one of the biggest ones that I see, and it is more of a brain one, but it's one that people are like, when I say it to them, which is that if you are constantly in a habit of seeing and unseeing things, that is a pretty clear sign that you're in a trauma bond, and that so if you're going through the motions where you're like, he did this and that was really messed up. Oh, but he probably did that because I did this and this and this. And you see things and you know it's wrong. And then you unsee it and you convince yourself that it's you, that you're the one, that there's something wrong with you, that you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that. If you're seeing things and they feel wrong and then you're telling yourself, you're talking yourself out of it, that's a pretty clear sign that you're in an abusive relationship, because somebody who is in a safe and secure relationship would be able to bring something up without being manipulated and told that it's them. And most of the time you tell yourself that it's you because that's conditioning from the relationship. So if you see things and unsee things, that's a pretty clear sign that you're in. And to the point where that is so strongly ingrained that even when I point that out to someone, they'll be like, oh, wow. Yeah, but are you sure that's what I'm doing? It's like, you just did it again.
It's crazy, isn't it? I think it's really hard because you see a lot of this on Instagram, and I've been single now for 4 years, but I think whenever I would be with someone and I'd feel all those like sparks and anxiety and all those feelings, I must like them. And they were the ones who obviously never worked out with, because my nervous system was literally screaming out to me, you're unsafe, this isn't good for you. And then the amount of guys that I felt so safe with, but because it's so it doesn't feel normal for me to feel safe. It's like the same thing with you. It's like, oh, well, they must just be a friend, because how can it be this simple? Like, how can I be this assured by someone and consistent? Yeah. There's got to be something wrong. Inconsistent.
Yeah, I literally did a post
knows, you know,
a while ago that popped up because everyone was like, yes. And it was like, if you've been in past toxic relationships or you've had trauma, the biggest green flag in dating is when you find yourself thinking he's not my type. Because it's like, your type is shit.
So true. Obviously, you have your book coming out, which is so exciting. Do you have any other future goals or advocacy work in mind for, I guess, so this year or next year?
The book is going to definitely be the advocacy. We're going to be donating some money to a couple of different foundations that have helped me personally and that we just believe in. And definitely getting the message out there. The advocacy is going to kind of funnel into the book. So I guess the advocacy work will be like educating people that 90% of sexual abuse is by a family member, not and 10% by outside/strangers. Like, it's actually 90% family. That's going to be a huge part of our advocacy. Talking about grooming, talking about the effects, talking about how it can be easy to miss, and, you know, just unpacking all of those things that we know personally. And then giving them, obviously, the book to break that cycle with their children. But then obviously there's that, like there's the next generation, there's the parents, but then there's also the people that have already had it happen to them, that are already struggling, traumatized, that have had all these horrific things happen and they don't know what to do. So for me personally, I'm launching a series called Triggered to Thriving. And it's basically a 5-part series that takes them through the journey that I went through, the journey that I've taken all my clients through. It's literally like 15 years in the making, and it's taking them through, this is where you're at. If you're waking up in panic, you're triggered by everything, this is what you need right now, and preparing them for the next step, because you can't just like go straight in with like, you know, ripping everything out. And the level that I talk to people at now is different to the people that are just starting. So it's taking them through that. I've also started through my certification. So I have a trauma therapy certification that I teach. I've started training. So I've got 120 students across the globe, and I've started taking my top students and training them even further to come on as co-therapists to work under me, so that when people finish this series, if they've got sexual trauma, they've got somewhere to go that actually works. Because the biggest thing that I'm finding is that I personally am waitlisted. My pricing is more expensive now. I can't help everybody that's blowing up in my DMs and emails and everything. So, and I'd love to be able to, but I'm just one person. So the way that I'm trying to build this is like, there's so many people that have experienced that trauma that before we can even break the cycle, they have to heal themselves. So there's that series for them to go through, which is as well like the most affordable thing I will ever launch, because I've noticed that the industry is so expensive when it comes to these things, like masterclasses that are a few $100s, which is amazing. And, you know, it's really important work, but also for traumatized people, they're not going to invest that money in themselves. It's a bit more of like an entry point for them to actually get an understanding of what works, because I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall every day, hearing stories from people saying, I did this and I did that and I went here and I saw this person, and they've spent thousands across different modalities and they're still not feeling fully fixed. So it's like giving them that roadmap of like, this is what you actually need. Like, here's the map, here's the steps, here's the healing hypnosis, here's the journal prompts, here's how to dig into this, really that out. So that's kind of that's my project.
Cool. Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much there that you're working on. Yeah, and you're doing some incredible work. So I do hope that if you are listening, that you go and check out Jessica Ella. Thank you so much for talking to me today and sharing your story. I always have a advice question as the last question on the podcast. So if there was somebody listening to this right now who has experienced sexual trauma and is struggling to open up to someone about it, what would be the advice that you would give them?
The biggest thing, like, and I hear this all the time, and it's so true, is that like, it's not your fault. What actually stops people from coming forward and speaking about these things is shame. And if you really break it down, like, shame is just a frequency. It's just a feeling. It's just an emotion. And the thing with shame is that once you share it, once you speak it, and somebody who's qualified, like, kind of reflects back to you that it wasn't your fault and that it's not your shame to carry, it just unburdens that from you. So I think for sexual trauma, like, it's noticing that you're not alone. Like, everybody with sexual trauma has shame around speaking up about it, has shame around looking into it, around feeling it. And really what that is that shameful feeling, that disgust, that the feelings that you're feeling are trapped in you because the memory is unprocessed. Once you process it, that feeling goes away. So it's really, what I often say to people is, you know, people like, I'm too scared to open the box. Like the analogy of like, I'm too scared to open the box. Like, I just don't even want to start. I don't want to bring it back up. And the reality is, you're not bringing it back up. You're living with it every single day. Shame is leaking out of you and leaking into every area of your life. The fear, the panic, whatever it is, it's already controlling you. You're already struggling. And it honestly, it only gets better. Maybe temporarily, it's a lot to deal with for your nervous system, but it only gets better. So my advice is always like, the best time to start is now, because I don't like to waste any life, don't like to waste any days. But yeah, I think it's just a feeling. What you're scared of in this process is what you're going to have to feel, and you're already feeling it. Like, it's already in you. You've already been through it. You're already feeling it probably every day if you actually really tapped in.
Thank you so much. That was so nice. And it was great advice. And thank you so, so much for being so vulnerable and for sharing your such a personal and traumatizing story on the podcast. It's not, I know it's something that you do on a daily basis, but still, thank you so much for sharing that and for helping so many people in the process of sharing that story.
It's really good to have places where you can speak, and that is part of healing as well. It's very healing to speak and to take, it's very powerful to take back that power. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Perfect.